reading the diary pieces. You'll hear from Florence in a second. So let's see, where we. So this presentation's a continuation of my research on the history of the kitchen. And today's presentation is on the houses, kitchens, and dining rooms of Lucy Maud Montgomery. So for some people, emotions are everything. And to me, emotions are so important in telling a story about a person's life. In the case of Lucy Maud Montgomery, we can track her emotions. Montgomery left us meticulously written diaries that document her thoughts, concerns, and provide insights into her life. So she would write, rewrite, go over her diaries because she knew that they were going to be read. And you can almost say that she curated her diaries. We're going to walk into Montgomery's kitchens, dining rooms, and see the impact that modern conveniences had on her life, and coincidentally, the lives of many rural women in the early decades of the 20th century. I'm going to take you through two Montgomery houses. The first house was located in Leaskdale, Ontario, where she lived from 1911 to 1926, a house with no electricity and no interior running water. And Leaskdale is just north of Uxbridge. In 1926, Montgomery moved to a second house in Norval, Ontario, a house with a larger kitchen, dining room, indoor plumbing, and electricity. Lucy Maud Montgomery, 1874 to 1942, is Canada's best-known author of the early 20th century. She's the author of the beloved Anne of Green Gables novel, considered the all-time greatest classic of Canadian literature. The book is about Anne, a sensitive, positive, independent-minded young female making her way through a culturally restrictive world. Since its publication in 1908, Anne of Green Gables has sold more than 50 million copies. 50 million copies in 36 different languages. Amazing. But life was not all rosy. While her literary figure Anne is portrayed as a happy-go-lucky child, the author Lucy Maud Montgomery led a difficult life. As the wife of a Presbyterian minister, she was responsible for giving multiple dinners and afternoon church luncheons. Her house in Leaskdale had no electricity, no running water, which made entertaining a challenge. In addition, she had to find time to write. By the 20th century, the Industrial Revolution had introduced technological innovations that completely changed the evolution of the kitchen, cooking, and dining. But in 1911, Leaskdale, Montgomery had none of these. She used an outhouse for 15 years. So on top of writing and being Canada's greatest writer at the time, when there was an event at the church, she had to organize the event. She had to cook for the event. She was always the lead speaker or the lead actor. Sometimes she was the organizer of the drama society. She had to cook, provide the cookies and the tarts, and then afterwards she had to clean up too. And on top of this, she also had to write. To find Lucy Maud Montgomery's house, I jump into my car on a sunny summer morning and drive an hour northeast of Toronto. And there's Leaskdale on the map, and Cobourg is perfectly situated right in the center of Lake Ontario, on the north shore of Lake Ontario. There we are. The highway dips down into a shallow valley, and the hamlet of Leaskdale unfolds in front of you. Oops, that's okay. I'll take that later. Here we are, a distant view of Montgomery's house. Montgomery's home is a two-story, buff-colored brick house with a cheerful front porch. It's a typical late 19th century farmhouse in the Victorian Gothic style, like so many in the region. I like its decorative elements: a gable roof, a wood veranda with restrained gingerbread roof brackets, a wood front door with an overhead transom, and simple wood window frames. I find it a happy-looking house, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you love to live there? I would love to live there. It's just the kind of house I'd sit on the porch and wave to people as they go by, right? But Montgomery disagreed. Of the manse, she writes in her journal.
September 24, 1911. The manse is quite prettily situated. It is not an ideal house by any means, but it will do. And it is certainly much more comfortable and convenient than my old home. It is built of white brick in the ugly L design, so common among country houses. My greatest disappointment in connection with it, it has no bathroom or toilet. I had hoped I might have a home with these at least, but what is to be will be. It is Allah, we will submit.
I'm met on the veranda by Melanie Whitfield, president of the Lucy Maud Montgomery Society of Ontario. We begin to chat, and I detect a genuine modesty in Melanie's manner. While she speaks proudly of the house, she makes a point to give credit to the many volunteers who donated funds and hammered nails to preserve the legacy of Montgomery in their community. They've done a magnificent job, and if you ever get a chance to go to Leesdale, I highly recommend it. As we walk along a side carriageway to review the exterior, Melanie tells me the story of Lucy Maud Montgomery. After her grandmother's death in 1911 on Prince Edward Island, she married Ewan MacDonald. There he is, a minister, and they moved to Ontario, where he'd taken the position of minister of St. Paul's Presbyterian Church in Leesdale. Montgomery suffered from depression. Reading her detailed diaries, one can easily detect severe mood swings. She writes about the joy of walking to the general store for the newspaper, enjoying the sunlight filtering through the leaves on the trees and the breeze on her face. She writes,
"What I live for are the high moments."
And then she'll turn around and write that she lives in despair in Leesdale.
September 11, 1921, Leesdale, Ontario. There isn't a single interesting person in this village. Not one who makes you feel better just because of a chat. I never really saw such a collection of stupid, uninteresting people. They know nothing but gossip, and malicious gossip at that. When I am feeling normal, I suffer them gladly and find some amusement in their stupidity. But when I am below par, I feel I could blow them all up with gunpowder.
And in my opinion, Lucy Maud Montgomery is Anne of Green Gables, and Anne of Green Gables is Lucy Maud Montgomery. In the book, Anne will be ecstatic about a beautiful morning, but then she also becomes disconsolate and says she does not have a bosom friend in Avonlea. On top of her own challenges, Montgomery's husband suffered from mental illness, referred to as religious melancholy. It fell to Montgomery to keep her husband motivated to preach. She had to pinch hit for him in the pulpit for her frequently ill husband. The Reverend MacDonald was not interested in literature and nature as Montgomery was. She writes in her diary,
January 5, 1917. I was never in love with Ewan. Never been in love with him, but I have been, and am very fond of him. I would not want him for a lover, but I hope at first that I might find a friend in him.
Montgomery believed it was her duty as a woman to make her marriage work, though she quipped to a reporter during a visit to Scotland that
those women whom God wanted to destroy, he made wives of ministers. You are right on, Mom.
The great increase in Montgomery's writing is the result of her need to escape the hardships of real life, says Melanie. But eventually she came to like her house in Leesdale. It was her first house. We walk around the exterior of the house that was built in 1886. And as we reach the back, I'm greeted by a large open yard of wood outbuildings, a hand water pump, wood fences, and the remnants of a vegetable garden. While the rear yard is sparse today, historic photos reveal it was a crowded space that included a large barn, stable, and the nemesis in Montgomery's life, the outside privy that sat at the rear of the property. Melanie tells me that the garden consoled Montgomery and was a constant source of happiness for her. She writes,
May 18, 1913. We have been gardening furiously since house cleaning was finished, and I am besottedly happy in it. My garden is such a joy to me. I had to go without one for so many years, and now I am quite drunk in the joy of having one again.
Melanie escorts me to the front porch of the house, and we step into the hallway, a modest two-story space with yellow floral wallpaper, and a finely detailed wood stair that leads to the second floor. Here's the floor plan of the house, and you can see on the first floor, we're in the hallway, right in the middle of the floor plan. To the right is the library, to the left is the parlor, and then beyond the parlor is the dining room, and then the kitchen. And then the second floor is bedrooms and a sewing area that we're going to go upstairs. Here's the parlor on the ground floor. So the parlor is a large, comfortable room where Montgomery wrote her stories at a table and chair in the northwest corner, right in that corner. Across the hall is the sunlit library, a large room similar to the parlor where Montgomery did her business. So she did all her business work here. And look, there are two desks across from each other. She sat at one and Ewan sat at the other. So they faced each other in this library, which is the business room. And she has all her documents, all her notes in these lawyers' cabinets all around the room. We're going up to the second floor. The second floor holds 4 bedrooms, including a sewing room. She would sew here during the day, and in the afternoon she could look out that window and see her boys coming home from school. And the spacious master bedroom where she gave birth to her 3 sons. We're going to go back downstairs, and on the main floor, I step into the 12-foot by 14-foot Montgomery dining room. Positioned between the parlor and the kitchen, I find it a handsome, modest-sized room with sunlight pouring in from a south-facing window. And we're just going to show some slides here of that dining room. Nice-looking dining room, wouldn't you say? I'd be very happy with it. You can see, though, that there are some doors that all converge on this one room. Lucy Maud Montgomery, on top of everything else, was a photographer, and she took pictures of her house and pictures of the neighborhood as well. These are her historic photographs of the dining room. And there they are. She's with her cousin here. They're having and her son. You can see that in the background there. They're having a very nice dinner in the dining room. I'd be honored to have dinner with Lucy Maud Montgomery in this dining room, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? She writes,
October 24, 1911. The dining room is my most unsatisfactory room, having almost every vice a room can have. It is too small. It is the only way of getting from the kitchen to the other part of the house, and cannot be kept clean easily. It opens into the kitchen and gets too warm and too smelly. The furnace pipe goes up through it, and it is not decorative. It has 5 doors and only 1 window, which gives a view of several ugly backyards, including our own. Fortunately, these things do not affect the flavor of our food.
Eventually, Montgomery did come to like her dining room. Melanie tells me it was her second favorite room to write in after the parlor. Finally, Melanie takes me to the kitchen located at the rear of the house. So we're going to go through that door on the left, and you can see in the dining room that door on the left opens into the kitchen. And there we are in the kitchen. And I can see right away, this is the most fascinating room in the house. Filled with kitchen utensils, oil lamps, and shelves, filled with early 20th century food products. It has an informal and cluttered appearance. That's a very cheerful look. The baking table is covered in baking utensils, including metal cookie sheets, muffin tins, and a rolling pin. Above the baking table on the wall is a shelf. You can see the shelf holding a variety of coal oil lamps. Very important at night to guide the family to the rear yard outhouse. A door on the kitchen east wall leads to the pantry summer kitchen that would be open for ventilation in good weather for relief from the heat of cooking. And there's also a chair against the wall where Montgomery once posed for a photo in 1922. And there she is in this beautiful dress and pearls in her kitchen. And you can see that very nice wallpaper in the background. I like that. Across the kitchen is the cook stove that Montgomery and her maid used for baking and preparing daily meals. In the early 20th century, wood and coal stoves were common in kitchens of middle-class homes. There was no accurate temperature gauge. It was all through feel and experience. Gathering fuel, keeping the fire going all day, and cleaning the stove was an all-day task. One appliance missing in Montgomery's kitchen was a refrigerator. It's not known if she even had an ice box for preserving food. Living in rural 1911 Ontario, it was bringing water from the pump, pickling and preserving vegetables, and canning chickens because there was no refrigerator. Lucy Maud Montgomery liked to cook, said Melanie. The kitchen gave her solace. That was a good thing. As the wife of the minister, she was responsible for cooking countless church luncheons, Sunday school picnics, and potluck affairs. She was always cooking. In 1926, Montgomery's husband, Ewan MacDonald, was offered a position as minister in Norval, Ontario, about 30 miles west of Toronto. The manse in Norval had modern conveniences, electric light, hot running water, and an indoor bathroom. Montgomery felt some ambivalence about leaving Leesdale. She began to feel sentimental about the manse and realized she had put down deep roots in the community. She writes,
November 5, 1925. Norval Manse is well designed and situated, and yet how I love this old manse. Where my children were born and where I have tasted such rapturous happiness and endured so much hideous agony.
Personally, I love the Leesdale Manse. Melanie and the volunteers have done a gorgeous restoration. I encourage you to visit the Leesdale Manse. But once they arrived in Norval, Montgomery loved it. And here's the map where Norval is. You can see it's due west of Toronto. Norval was a beautiful village set in the Credit River Valley. She writes,
Norval is so beautiful now that it takes my breath. Those pine hills full of shadows, those river reaches, those bluffs of maple and smooth-trunked beech with drifts of white wild blossom everywhere. I love Norval as I have never loved any place save Cavendish.
Here we are, approaching Norval. We're going to drop down into this little valley. And there it is. There's the very impressive brick church on the right and the manse across the lawn on the left.
The Manse, Norval, Ontario, February 28, 1926. Norval Manse is well designed and situated. It is of red brick. The kitchen is much larger and more convenient than the Leesdale one. We have the soft water pump in the kitchen, which is a good item, and there is a back staircase. Our dining room here is large and light with a big bay window at the end and a door opening onto the veranda through which we can see the beautiful pine wood on the hill behind the village.
So I'm just going to show some photos here of the manse. Here's the front. Kathy Gassel and Kathy have come all the way from Norval to be here today. Thank you so much. Kathy's doing a great job in Norval with the house and with the volunteers, and with the eventual goal of restoring this manse and telling the story of Lucy Maud Montgomery in Norval. Here's the front porch, steeple in the background. Here's the side elevation. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. This lovely porch that opens out from the bay window dining room and the rear elevation of the house. So we step through the front door, and we step into this vestibule through this door that's topped by a large transom with 2 side lights and a spacious entrance foyer. The door on the left opens into the parlor. On the right is the staircase up at the 2nd floor. You can see it takes a very nice little curve at the top of the stair. And straight ahead in the hall is the hallway into the dining room. So it's a stately house. It's different from Leesdale's. It's more stately. Here's the floor plans. And the floor plan of the ground level here. We're coming into the foyer over here on the right. You can see the living room, the dining room through the hallway, and then the kitchen at the rear. So as I walk through the 11-foot by 14-foot parlor, I admire elaborate wood mantle, and a very nice fireplace insert. The photo at the bottom is a photo of the parlor. The original plaster cornices are there. A lamp hangs from the decorative plaster ceiling, and the bay window faces west and brings in afternoon sunlight. We go up to the 2nd floor, and on the 2nd floor are 4 bedrooms, and at the back is Montgomery's long-awaited bathroom with a flush toilet. So Montgomery occupied a bright room where she did her writing with a view to the pine-filled hills and the winding Credit River. She writes,
This afternoon, I sat at my window and alternately wrote my new serial and watched a couple of dear, amusing, and youngish maple trees at the front of our garden. They whispered secrets to each other all the afternoon. They would bend together and talk earnestly for a few moments, and then spring back and look at each other, throwing up their hands comically in horror and amazement over their mutual revelations. I wonder what new scandal is afoot in Treeland.
Well, there's Treeland. For Montgomery, the biggest architectural change was the dining room. As I step into the brightly lit dining room, I realize it's the largest room in the house. The 20-foot by 30-foot room has a grand presence, really has a grand presence. I know immediately that the dining room was meant to be the showpiece of the house. The focus of the dining room is the grand bay window at the south end of the room that gives a light, airy ambiance to the room. The splendid view out the 3 bay windows spreads out to include Montgomery's garden in the foreground, the expansive green lawn of the manse, and in the distance is the steeple and red brick church surrounded by mature maple trees. I realize that it's the elaborate woodwork encasing the windows that brings an elegance to the windows in the entire room. So here's some historic photographs by Montgomery of her dining room. Again, beautiful woodwork. Some of the floral wallpaper in the dining room at the time. Oops, let's go back. And this is the dining room today. It's being rented to a tenant. And if you can sort of blur your eyes from some of the furnishings in the house, you can see the very rich and stately, elaborate woodwork around that window. So that the room and the house has a much more elegant feel to it. You can see the way that these window frames go right to the floor with these really nice carved panels at the bottom of the windows. You can see the type of woodwork that's happening in this dining room. The door to the left opens out onto the very nice outdoor porch that looks out onto the garden. And this is that porch during the period that she was living there. Another historic photograph by Montgomery. Isn't that nice, the way that they very turned columns and brackets and painted in this these different colors and these vines coming up the columns. So it would be very nice for her to have a nice dinner in that dining room with the bay window looking out across the lawn to the church, and then after dinner you can open up the door and have tea out on this outdoor porch and look across the lawn, look at her flowers. Very nice. Oh, here we go. And then what I realized, Kathy, when I was there that time, was that the side of the house is really the front of the house. that it shows off the most impressive facade with the dining room bay window and side dining porch as the showpiece of the room of the house. So the house is designed to be seen from the church and across the lawn. Another great change in the house from Montgomery was the presence of modern conveniences. So this is a picture of Spadina in Toronto, but it's a 1930s kitchen, so that's why I'm showing it. The 20th century was the dawning of a new age in house and kitchen design. Families enjoyed new innovations such as ice boxes, gas cooking ranges, and hot running water. Having indoor plumbing and electricity in Norval in 1926 was a big step up for Montgomery. The kitchen, located at the rear of the house, is a large room, 14 feet by 20 feet, with plenty of counter space around the exterior of the room. So this is the way the kitchen looks today. Obviously, it's a modernized kitchen, but this is where she would have done her cooking. Today, the kitchen's heavily renovated. There appears to be nothing remaining of the original kitchen. 3 large windows fill the room with sunlight and offer views to the south and east of the site. A historic photo taken by Montgomery reveals that the kitchen walls were designed with wainscoting that rose to waist height and topped with molding that matches wood in the rest of the house. The upper wall sections were wrapped in a light-colored wallpaper with a cheerful floral pattern. She owns an icebox that's located near the dining room to keep food fresh. A second historic photograph taken by Montgomery captures an image of her electric stove that's up against the back east wall. It's a self-standing unit with multiple burners, knobs to control heat, an oven, a broiler, and a warmer compartment. And this photo also captures a large wall-hung sink with 3 faucets for running water on the south wall. So she has running water as well as an electric stove in her kitchen. Here's the stove. Montgomery embraced electricity wholeheartedly. You know, it's kind of hard to believe that as we live today, that people did not have electricity in their kitchens, but this was the case. While her journal reflects a nostalgic preference for a wood-burning stove, there's not a moment's hesitation in selecting a new electric range when her old oil stove stopped working. In 1935, she bought a new electric refrigerator as well. She writes,
"We had an electric range installed today. The oil stove was done, and since I had to get something, I got an electric range. I think I shall like it. It is clean and convenient. But if I had my choice of cookery beast, I'd choose an old Waterloo stove with plenty of good hardwood."
She liked the presence of electric light. She writes,
"I do like the electric light. It is an odd thing that last fall was the first time I ever felt a longing for electric light. I had a gasoline lamp which I used for reading and sewing, and I like it better than the electric light. I felt I'd like to have hydro, and here I have it. And after 2 weeks of it, I wonder how I ever did without it. It gives such a nice, omnipotent feeling to press a button, let there be light, and there is light."
If her new life with modern conveniences could set the mood, it's reflected in the more positive entries into her journals and diaries, and vigor in community activities.
"There's one thing I like about our little library, its little reading lamp. Tonight, for the first time in months, I had a cozy, undisturbed evening of reading in one of my comfy new reed chairs in the library corner. It was delightful to have a good read again, with that heavenly feeling of leisure and tranquility which has been lacking so long."
Modern conveniences improved Montgomery's life, allowed her to spend more time writing, helping in the community, and improved her social well-being. In Norval, her mood improved. She became more engaged in the community. Her entries became less caustic. Less well-known is her considerable talent in the kitchen. She was an excellent cook and took great interest in good food. She writes,
"If I had not been a poor devil of an author, I think I would have made an excellent cook."
Montgomery wrote a 440 recipe cookbook in longhand in a business ledger. And here I am with members of the Culinary Historians of Canada, and we're looking at this Montgomery cookbook. In rounded, swirling cursive, she describes how to make hamburger steaks, canned chicken, pancakes, spare ribs, and scalloped fish. It provides a glimpse of food in the early 1900s. Here's her recipe for raggedy Ann's. As a minister's wife, Montgomery was always prepared for meetings, Sunday school picnics, and visits with salads, cakes, jellies, biscuits, or cookies. She writes,
Frankly, I am very fond of a good table. I keep one myself, and I like to sit down at one. It is an old Montgomery tradition, and when I hear anyone say, I don't care what I have to eat, I conclude that individual is either lying or is a pale, anemic creature of very little use and no charm or force in the world. And I have mostly found that this conclusion was borne out by the facts of the case.
I think if I went to the house, I better eat. So this is a photograph of Aunt Maud's recipe book put together by the Crawfords, family of Lucy Maud Montgomery. The recipes are unique to an era of Canadian cooking. The simplicity reflects ingredients availability, the necessity for innovation, and the lack of many outside cultural influences in the early 1900s. Norval Manse dining room was frequently the setting for afternoon luncheons. Because of Ewan's professional obligations, Maud's involvement with the Women's Institute, and her large circle of friends, she often entertained and prepared a lunch menu. And here we are in the basement of Norval Church having lunch with Lucy Maud Montgomery recipes made by the volunteers, by Kathy Gassel and her volunteers. Thank you, Kathy. This was a great lunch. Lucy Maud Montgomery lunch. Here in the foreground is my place setting. I love it. We're just going to go through this. Thank you. It was great. And here we are. So this is my lunch. This is a Lucy Maud Montgomery lunch, typical lunch. Chicken and egg salad sandwiches on the left. The little disc top left is a salmon pie made with canned salmon. Right? The lettuce salad is made with a boiled dressing. Those are the kind of dressings that were used at the early 20th century. And my favorite is the disc on the right, this orange disc. It's called a sunshine salad. Orange gelatin with slivered celery and carrots in the shape of a sun. Mm-hmm. Sunshine salad, so Anna Green Gables, I love it. And then the top is my favorite. It's the watermelon rind pickles. So you can see the dish of brown pickles at the top. So at the turn of the century, nothing's wasted. Even the watermelon rinds are kept and made into pickles. And for dessert, we had cookies and tarts, Lucy Maud Montgomery cookies and tarts. And these are mock cherry tarts. So they're tarts made with raisins. And because cherries are seasonal, you try and use other ingredients to represent cherries. And these are made with raisins, which while cherries are out of season. At the turn of the century, there's a whole flurry of mock recipes that come out because of seasonality. So we have mock duck, which is really a beef steak, pounded and rolled up and stuffed, and that becomes a mock duck. Here we go. The MacDonald family lived in Norval from 1926 to 1935 in the manse. Despite the fresh start for the MacDonalds at Norval, life began to deteriorate. Ewan's mental illness worsened. Montgomery became increasingly bitter. Ewan's problem could no longer be concealed, and he was forced by the church to resign, though he was near retirement age anyway. Montgomery had hoped to stay in Norval, but her sons were attending university in Toronto, so she set her sights in that direction. Montgomery's money allowed them to move to a lovely Tudor-style house in the fashionable Swansea district of Toronto. That's the west end of Toronto. The backyard swept down to the Humber River, knowing it would be likely be her and Ewan's last home, she called it Journey's End. And I've been there, and it sweeps down to the Humber River. It's really quite beautiful. And by complete accident, I visited a friend in this house, and because I'm such a maniac, I had to photograph the Lucy Maud Montgomery kitchen. Anyway, so this is the kitchen in that house, and you can see the windows, very nice windows over the sink, and that all looks down into that valley that looks down into the Humber River. It's really quite beautiful. She continued to publish. During her lifetime, Montgomery published 20 novels and over 500 short stories. On April 24th, 1942, Montgomery passed away. Some believe that Lucy Maud Montgomery deliberately over-medicated herself, and others believe it was a tragic mistake. She writes,
Monday, April 29, 1935, Journey's End, Toronto. I had a fair sleep, but wakened at 5, so got up and went to work. I could not lie there thinking. Today was something better, not so many waves. I went downtown and decided to make myself a present, something I've not done for a long time. I bought a Westinghouse electric refrigerator. It really is a necessity here. I got the living room done today. I cannot afford curtains yet, but the oriel arched windows are so beautiful, one does not really miss curtains. Ned and Nora spent the evening here, and I felt a bit cheered up. Thank God for friends. It is raining again tonight. A soft, brooding April rain. It will be falling on the lovely green lawn at Norval.
even though she'd moved to Toronto, she continued to think about Norval and the view out her dining room window across the lawn, wistful. Lucy Maud Montgomery's writing continues to resonate today, with book sales, theater productions, television shows such as Anne with an E. Anne of Green Gables is only increasing in popularity. In conclusion, we know about the importance of Anne in Japan. Recently, I spoke with a person from Japan who told me that during the pandemic, the character and determination of Anne was more important than ever to young female readers in Japan. Even though she might be gone, all around us, all around the world, Lucy Maud Montgomery is still alive and still with us today. There she is in her garden. Thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you so much. Thank you to Florence Fletcher for reading the diaries of Lucy Maud Montgomery.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Al Seymour, for having us. Thank you.